Hi everybody, this is number 2 in our series of the readings of articles from early 1900s from a lovely lady named, I keep on forgetting her name, Bertha E. Batt. She filled this lovely, large catalog of hardware catalog with articles from newspapers and things, all little love stories. Very funny. So we're on number 2 right now. The name of this one is called Kismet. What Fate Did for Dick Madison and Dolly Seymour. And again, I'm looking over here. I keep on looking the wrong way. I'm so sorry. But we're going to look over here. So we're going to get reading. Let's get to it. Half a minute before the Riverdale Express was to pull out of the Grand Central Station, a cab dashed up to the entrance. A tall, athletic young fellow leaped out and handed the driver a bill, grabbed his suitcase, and rushed to the ticket office. He had barely time to run down the long station to his train, for as he swung himself up the steps, the engine slowly pulled out with its heavy load. The 4:20 for Riverdale generally was crowded, and this particular day was no exception. As the young man passed through car after car, not a vacant seat was to be seen. Finally, he stopped by the only place left in the whole train. Next to the window sat a remarkably pretty girl of about 20. Chic was written all over her, from the folded Persian scarf on her little traveling hat to the perforated tips of her jaunty Oxfords. For the rest, there was a brown skirt, short of course, and a white waist with scarlet belt and butterfly tie. That must be a shirt. The young man hesitated a moment. She glanced up with a pair of brown eyes in which contended mischief and demureness. Ooh. The young man gave a little start, but the girl straightway looked out of the window again, so he said nothing and sat down. She appeared to find the landscape of cobblestone streets and Harlem flats extremely interesting, for she gazed at them intently. Once she turned and glanced at him, but finding his eyes frank, blue eyes they were, fixed on her, she turned away with a little toss of her curly brown head, and he could see the red blood mount in her tan cheek. Sorry, guys. Some of the language, it's like I'm trying to make sure that I read it correctly. Hang it, he said to himself. I am sure that is it. Hang it, he said to himself. I am sure that it is. Okay. Which remark, though not clear to an outsider, was full of meaning to him, for this same brown-eyed face was fixed in his memory. He had seen those same brown curls under vastly different circumstances, and had thought of them more than is deemed consistent when a man is engaged to someone else. Richard Madison was a young man of some wealth, nominally in charge of a fine old estate, but the lifelong friend and lawyer of his late father attended to the business so well that the young man was only too glad to leave it entirely in these hands and enjoy himself traveling. The past 15 months he had spent abroad with several friends, and he had but that very morning stepped off the fleetest of modern ocean greyhounds. His first thought was to run up to Rose Hill. Sorry, guys. And see Helene Carey, his fiancée. She did not know he was coming, for their correspondence of late had not been very spirited. Helen had been at Newport and yachting a good deal. There's a little bit of scraping on the edge here, so if you hear me pause, it's because I'm trying to figure out what the word is here, so I apologize for that. But let's continue. She was a favorite socially, as she was rich and more amicable than clever. Their engagement had never been announced, but it had been an understood thing between their families for several years. From a social standpoint, it was an excellent match. Madison had often found himself wishing that Helene was, different. He could not exactly define what he meant. Since that idiot Morris told her she looked like Eames, she has been colder than ever, he said to himself savagely. He thought now of Helene's placid eyes and smooth hair. Now, if it only curled like, his eye wandered again to the brown curls so close to his shoulder, and he thought of the time he had seen this same pretty head dripping wet and the small face very white. With two chums, he was steaming along the Thames in a launch between the beautiful green banks and picturesque homes of which the English are so justly proud. Suddenly they heard a shriek and a splash, and turned to see a white dress disappear into the water. Madison sprang out and swam toward her, missed her the first time, but when she came up, grabbed her, and in a moment's time was rolling her most unromantically on the grass, while the people of the house came rushing down with restoratives and thanksgivings in the usual incoherent jumble. Wow. He remembered how he broke away from them as soon as she opened those brown eyes, and many times since he had groaned inwardly at his idiotic remark when she looked into his eyes and murmured some words of thanks. And now, after all these months, here he was sitting in the same seat with her, on the way to see Helene. They were just entering the tunnel now, and the girl struggled to close the window. Before she could make it work, however, in they dashed, and a whiff of the ill-smelling smoke swept in. Madison reached over to the obstinate window, which, recognizing the masculine touch, obediently closed. Somehow in the process, his hand met hers. "Thank you ever so much," said a small, sweet voice. When he had resumed his seat, he raised his hat. "Don't mention it." She turned now and looked straight into his eyes, while an amused expression danced in her own. "Do you always say that?" she asked. "So you have consented to recognize me," he replied. "Awfully good of you. No, I have a few other phrases at my command if I only have a chance to show them off." "Why did you run away?" she demanded. "Why, you know I had to go after my hat. It was floating down the river, you know." The last part of his sentence was lost in her burst of laughter. "How perfectly absurd!" she exclaimed, and laughed again. "But if that isn't just like a man, to save a girl's life and not stay for thanks and introductions because his precious hat is gone. We tried and tried to find you, but we only had that place for the season and left in about a month afterward. We? The aunts I always travel around with. They have been ready ever since to fall on your neck with gratitude and tears." "Oh," protested the young man, on whose brow the laurels of Lifesaver did not rest easily. "It didn't amount to anything." "Oh, of course not," she answered quickly with exaggerated politeness. "But you needn't lay such stress on it." "But he began. Then their eyes met and both laughed. "Your eyes are brighter than ever," he said. "And you've shaved your mustache." "Why, I haven't worn a mustache for a year. That's another rescue you were thinking about." "Is it a habit of yours to fall into the river when a young man happens to go by in a boat?" She flashed a scornful glance in his direction. "I never forget anybody or anything, though that is more than some people might say. You wore a mustache in the fall of 1899 going up the Nile. It shows in the picture. So it was you who took that snap of me from the stern of the Silver Sail." "I was photographing all the funny things I saw." Another smile danced in the brown eyes. "To think," said he, addressing the plush-backed seat in front of them, "that I've known you more than a year, and this is our third meeting, and I don't know your name yet." "I don't know yours." "It is Dick." "Mine is Dolly." "Then my other name ought to belong to you too, for it is Madison, and that combination would just suit you." They were out of the tunnel long ago. "Open the window, please, now," said Dolly. "It is getting a little close, don't you think?" He obeyed silently. "Where are you going now, Dolly?" She looked out the window, absorbed in the spectacle of a black dog chasing a yellow one across the field. "I am going to Riverdale, Mr. Madison." "Do you live there, Miss Dolly?" "Miss Seymour," she put in. "Not Dorothy Seymour, Harvey's sister?" he cried. "Yes," she said. "Why not?" "Why, he used to blow about you until we were all crazy to see you, and then you never did show up at commencement or anything, and we decided you were a myth." "There," she exclaimed. "That explains it." "What?" "Why, your face being so familiar. You are the one with the banjo sitting in the window seat of Harvey's room at college. He has a picture at home of his den with half a dozen of the boys in it." "Oh, I remember that picture. Well, isn't it all strange? Miss Seymour, do you believe in fate? What do you call fate? Well, sometimes I think that you are destined to do a certain thing or meet a certain person, and fate acts as a sort of a conductor, you know. Here he stopped rather confusedly. He had just thought of Helene for the first time. Possibly, said Miss Seymour. Where do you think fate is taking you now? He gave himself an inward shake. I'm going to Rose Hill, he said. Oh, do you know people there? I spent a few days there last week at Rose Hill. I didn't know many there, and they say that nothing happens there in an age, but we had at least one exciting event during my stay. What was that? Why, the beauty of the place. Let me see. What was her name? Eloped. Her family was terribly shocked. My friend says they are very proud and that the girl was tired of society. Carey. That was her name. Helene Carey. Why, do you know her? I have met her, replied Madison, whose heart was thumping violently. Perhaps that was an illustration of the fate you were talking about, she went on. Love is a curious thing, isn't it? Rose Hill, called the conductor from the end of the car. Why, this is your station, exclaimed Miss Seymour. You will have to hurry. But Madison sat still, though he kept the little hand she held out to him for goodbye. I think, said he, if you don't mind, I will go on with you to Riverdale. The end. What do you think of that story? Let's take a look. I'm going to read another story real quick here, because otherwise if I do one video, it's going to take us forever to get through this book. So, listen, these are so cute, I can't stand it. Tracing resemblances. My Aunt Betsy Barker is one of the best-hearted women in existence, but she was born with the faculty for tracing resemblances, and that faculty has been fostered and cultivated so much, or to such an extent, that an Eastern olden-time soothsayer, gifted with second sight and 2 pairs of spectacles, could hold no comparison with my Aunt Betsy. Last summer, I went to make my relative a visit. That's a weird sentence. I found her, as usual, hard at work, for she resides on a farm, and all farmers' wives know that their office is no sinecure. Aunt Betsy was paring apples for drying, for it was getting towards the last of August. She lifted her glasses and surveyed me with evident surprise. Why, the good land! If here ain't Corey Carlyle. Well, I never. Who'd have thought of seeing you? We've had company all week and just got rid of them this morning. But they hadn't been gone more'n 5 minutes afore the red rooster come and crowed right on the doorstep, and I'd know there'd be somebody here afore night. Says I to your Uncle Eben, says I, who on earth do you think is coming by now? And your uncle, he said he didn't know somebody or another would be tramping, he supposed. How's your ma? I signified that the health of those I had left behind me was good. Is? Well, I'm glad to hear it. I've had a dreadful cold lately myself. Seemed as if I could sneeze from morning till night if I hadn't had nothing else to 'a done. Your father, he had the rheumatiz last spring when I was down there. Had it bad. He looked older than my great-grandfather did when he died, and he was 98 in 2 months. No, 98 in 7 weeks. How much your father looks like old Simon Sniggs. If he only wore a frock and breeches, he'd be the exact facsimile of him. Nose is a little longer, though. Do take off your bonnet. Do. I'd get up and wait upon you, but my hands is into the apples, and I didn't want to stop to wash 'em. I deposited my outside garments on a table and seated myself in a rocking chair. I particularly admire rocking chairs. Never, in fact, feeling perfectly at my ease unless I have one at my disposal. There, don't go to seesawing in that there cheer, cried, sorry. They tried to do this nice accent, and I'm motioning it up a little. Cried my aunt, nobody but lazy folks sit in rocking chairs. Put on this blue apron and lend a hand with those apples. I've got 3 bushels to peel and slice and get dry afore tomorrow night. Silas Sims, the tin peddler, is a-gonna bring me a new washed biler, and these apples is to pay for it. I took hold of the apples rather unwillingly, I confess, for I had brought the last number of my favorite magazine with me and had not even cut the leaves as yet. Let's see, Corey, how old be you? 22 the 17th of July, or was it 23? I informed her that I was 20 on the day she mentioned. Oh, pshaw, don't go to equivocating about your age. if you hain't married, nor no signs of it. Time enough yet, no hurry. Though I think you'd ought to be looking around. Likely enough you come up here to get a beau, but I'm afeard you won't make out, for there hain't but only one engaged man in the place, and he's cross-eyed. Oh, boy. Suit sees two ways to once, and smokes and chaws. Wouldn't suit your pa. Why, I declare, now I come to get a fair squint at you, how much you do favor your old grandmarm Richardson. A sight, don't she, Polly? To her daughter. Only seems to me your grandmarm's nose wasn't so much of a turnip, and her hair warn't nigh so red. I responded indignantly that my hair was auburn. Auburn? Where's that? Oh, it's the town where Aunt Polly Fisher lives. I don't know nothing about it. Never was there, but your hair is a decided red. Looks a good deal like Paul Smith's Peggy's, only hern's straight as a candle. I suppose yourn is if you didn't curl it onto a hot iron. And my life, if your dress ain't the very counter-stitch of old Miss Stebbins. The same ground-work exactly. She wove hers herself, made it out of black and white sheep's wool. I'm pretty sure those are all insults. The speech about my beautiful Irish poplin that cost $2 a yard in Boston. Okay, so maybe, I don't know. I replied that it was oh, goodness gracious. I replied that it was a Brobdingnag girdle. A hag girdle? Well, I should say it was rightly named, for it's precisely like a hoss collar. And that great buckle is just such a thing as your Uncle Eben has got to the cart harness. Well, of all the fashions, pare them apples a little thinner, you're wasting 'em dreadfully. It's a sin to be wasteful, Corey. Corey, what's a name that is? Proud Corey's troops was swallowed up. Name for him, I reckon? I disgustedly denied the assertion. Oh, well, you needn't flare up. I declare now, when you was mad, if you warn't the express image of Nellie Higgins, that crazy basket maker. Her aunt's a little fun, isn't she? The conversation, or the monologue, for Aunt Betsy had it her own way, was pretty much of the same style all that day, and the next, and the next. I was worked like a hired girl. Aunt Betsy did not believe in sitting still. Folks could rest enough a night, she said, but I found it a difficult matter to rest at all nights. My aunt was not disposed to make company of me, and she put me to sleep with her two eldest girls and the baby. And all three of them kicked so continuously that I might as well have slept in the hopper of a grist mill. The third evening of my stay, I was surprised by a call from Clarence Fitzjasmine, a friend of mine from the city, a very particular friend I considered him. Not that he had actually proposed, but he had said some very softly interesting things to me during sundry moonlight walks and rides, and I fancied myself in love with his distinct air and blonde mustache. Aunt Betsy ushered him in, and of course I was obliged to present him. She shook hands with him and seated herself on the lounge close by his side. He drew off with aristocratic hauteur and began speaking to me of the exquisite loveliness of the evening. "Look-a-here, youngster," said Aunt Betsy, "I want to ask you civil questions. Be you any relative to Jim Scriggins?" Mr. Fitzjamin raised his high-bred eyebrows and looked at her. Any ordinary woman would have withered before that gaze. "I have not that honor," he replied, in a tone of frigid dignity. "Oh, there's no harm in it, nohow, for Jim has robbed my hen roost of 3 of the best pullets I had, and you can't raise a watermelon in the neighborhood for him. But I could have enamos, I don't even know what the word is, took my Bible oath that you is his uncle or his father. Your noses are as alike as 2 peas, and you've got his very eyes. Sheep's eyes, they allers call 'em, and your hair is just the same carroty color, and that thing on your upper lip looks just as spindling as his does. Carroty, too." "Madam, I admire your discrimination," returned Fitzjasmine, with lofty contempt. "Your organ of color must be largely developed." Oh, I don't know. I'm quite a hand at coloring if I happen to have good luck. I can just get such a shade of yeller with smartweed as your hair. Sweet apple tree bark will come pretty nigh in it. Reckon you color your whiskers. They're so much darker, and I've hearn say that they've got hair dye stuffs that'll color any shade from jet black down to clear white. Fitzjasmine remarked to me that the new mown hay smelled delightfully. Yep, so it does, said Aunt Betsy, or would if it hadn't been mowed so long. Why, man alive, our folks was done haying 3 weeks ago. But if I may make so bold, I'd like to know what it is that smells so about you, sir. Fitz colored scarlet. I did not come here to be insulted. Law me, no offense. I meant well. I didn't know what you'd got a fowl of a muskrat and didn't know that he'd scented you. It's powerful, though. I'll just open the windies a minute and burn a feather. I guess that'll fix it. Fitzjasmine arose. Miss Cora, he said loftily, allow me to bid you good night. I went upstairs and cried, and Aunt Betsy aired the sitting room until after midnight. And I may as well say that after that Fitzjasmine cut me perfectly. I had such vulgar connections, and he could not tolerate them, he said. The ensuing day a fine old lady came visiting my aunt. She was introduced as Mrs. Selford. There, Mrs. Selford, said Aunt Betsy, this is my niece, and I've been thinking ever since she arrived how much she resembles your son Edward's first wife. I'd say first wife because I suppose he'll be getting a second one soon. Corey has got just her mouth and the same kind of a little giggling laugh. Miss Selford smiled. You are expert at tracing resemblances, Aunt Betsy, she said, and yes, and I've sought out all along to send over after Edward to see Corey. She'd make a nice wife, only she don't know how to work. Edward will come for me this evening, said Mrs. Selford, and you can speak to him about it. Edward did come that evening, and I could not help acknowledging that he was worth a dozen men like Fitzjasmine. Aunt Betsy greeted him with, There, Mr. Selford, this is my niece, Corey Carlyle, and she looks enough like your first wife to be her own sister, and you have my full consent to court and marry her if you want to. But she don't know how to skim milk, and I must say that she's the awkwardest person to wash up a floor that I ever seed. Mr. Selford laughed, and I joined him, and we were acquainted at once. And to cut the story short, 3 weeks after our first meeting, Mr. Selford asked me to be his wife, and we are to be married at Christmas. Aunt Betsy declares it was all owing to my extraordinary resemblance to Edward's first wife. There we go. These are adorable. Okay, so we're going to continue on with the series. This is the second one of the series. And again, at the end of reading this book of all these really fun stories from the early 1900s, and I apologize if I can't get the language quite down, but it is very different, obviously. I will be giving this book away. If you desire to be the person to win the book, I need you to send me an email, which is in the description, and in the subject line put book raffle, and you will be entered in the raffle. So once I complete reading the stories, this will be going to whoever, one of you. I hope it's you. So in the meantime, you guys have a great day. I will see you again soon. Take care and adios.